My name is Cassandra Hartwell. I am 56 years old, and for most of my life, people have called me steady, dependable, the one who never falters. It used to sound like a compliment. That morning, standing at the door of the house I had spent decades keeping together, it felt more like a curse. The rumble of a truck shook the quiet of our Savannah street. When I opened the door, I saw my brother Daniel climb out, his wife Clara just a step behind him, dressed like she was arriving for a photo shoot rather than a family visit. Two movers swung down from the back of the truck, already pulling straps and gloves into place. Clara didn't waste a second. Her voice was bright, almost cheerful, as she announced, "This is for our new house. You don't need this anymore." Before I could gather my breath, the movers pushed past me as if my doorway belonged to them. They began sticking neon labels on my television, my refrigerator, even the paintings I had dusted only yesterday. The speed of it was dizzying. My living room transformed into a showroom being cleared for auction. Daniel hovered in this background, eyes sliding away from mine. I searched his face for the boy I had raised after our parents died. The boy I had cooked for, scolded, defended. All I saw was a man pretending to be busy with boxes so he wouldn't have to watch me watch him. By the time the truck's door slammed shut, my house looked smaller, emptied out of its heart. If you have ever felt betrayed by the people who should have been your biggest supporters, let me know where you are watching from. I stood on the porch as they drove away. At the gates of their new neighborhood, the truck braked, tires screeching, and everyone inside went still. When I was 16, my friends were planning dances and summer trips while I was figuring out how to stretch a grocery budget for two. Our parents had died within months of each other, my father in a shipyard accident, my mother from an illness she had hidden too long. Daniel was only 8 then. I became his stand-in parent before I had even finished being a child myself. We lived in the old Hartwell house on Gaston Street, the creaking bones of it echoing around us at night. I kept the lights on by taking odd jobs at the college downtown, shelving books in the library by day and cleaning lecture halls by night. On weekends, I worked at a rare bookshop along the river, breathing in the dust of other people's stories while trying to hold on to our own. I made sure Daniel never felt the thinness of our meals, though it meant I went without new clothes, without nights out, without the freedom other girls carried so easily. I thought it was worth it when he showed me his drawings of skyscrapers and bridges, declaring he would build bigger, better things than this small city could hold. Even then, he was restless with our humble roots, looking at the peeling wallpaper as though it had insulted him personally. Years passed, and I clapped the loudest when he graduated, believing my sacrifices had been enough to build his future. But when he brought Clara home for the first time, I felt the air shift. She was tall and poised, wearing a dress the color of coral and shoes that clicked sharply against my worn floors. Her eyes traveled the room like an appraiser's, and her smile never quite reached me. Daniel held her hand as though it was his lifeline, and I knew before a word was spoken that my place in his story had already begun to shrink. It began with little things, the sort of favors families are supposed to exchange without keeping score. Clara admired a set of old cookbooks that had belonged to our mother. "They'll be safer at our place," she said with a bright smile, already slipping them into her tote before I found the words to respond. Daniel stood by the door, fiddling with his keys, as if he hadn't heard. Next, it was a bundle of dishes I rarely used, blue and white porcelain my father had bought at an estate sale. Clara said she wanted them for Sunday dinners, something that still feels like family. The way she said family made me feel as though I was only a distant cousin, not the woman who had raised Daniel through the leanest years of his life. I told myself they were only dishes, nothing worth a quarrel, but when I saw my cupboards with their hollow spaces, I felt a sting I couldn't quite name. The pattern kept repeating. A hammer from the shed, a quilt folded at the end of my bed, even a silver spoon with my initials engraved, which Clara claimed was too pretty to be left unused. She wrapped each removal in the same phrase, "It's all in the family." That phrase became a soft blade, sliding under my skin every time she said it. I wanted to protest, but the words turned to stone in my mouth. The thought of pushing Daniel further away kept me silent. After all, hadn't I given up more for him before? Hadn't I spent years turning my life into his foundation? My sacrifices had always felt natural. But these small thefts left me unsettled in a way I didn't know how to express. Daniel never argued on his wife's behalf, nor did he defend me. He simply stayed quiet, avoiding the tension like a man afraid of breaking something fragile. I sometimes caught his eyes flickering with unease, but he always looked away before I could be certain. In that silence, Clara's voice grew stronger, filling every corner of the room until my own home no longer sounded like mine. The morning they came with the truck, the sun was already high, pouring sharp light through the lace curtains. I was in the kitchen, hands deep in dishwater, when the sound of grinding gears pulled me to the window. A moving truck blocked half the street. Two men in gray uniforms climbed down, carrying clipboards behind them. Clara stepped out of her car in tailored slacks and dark glasses, her stride brisk, her tone already commanding. Daniel trailed after her, shoulders hunched, gaze fixed on the pavement. They didn't knock. Clara walked straight through my front door as if she owned the hinges. "We have a list," she announced, waving the clipboard toward the movers. "Start with the television, then the refrigerator, then the paintings." Her voice cut through the air like a gavel. The men nodded, heading toward the living room without hesitation. I opened my mouth to object, but nothing came out. My brother stood by the doorway, hands shoved in his pockets. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anything except the floorboards he used to polish when he was a boy, the ones I had kept gleaming all these years. The movers worked quickly. The television disappeared first, cables dangling like entrails. The refrigerator followed, its absence leaving behind a cold square of tile. Then one of them reached for the painting above the mantel, my father's favorite. A marshland at dusk we had bought together at a market when I was 12. I remembered him saying, "So, we'll always have a piece of home, no matter where life takes us." Now the canvas was yanked from its hooks, carried out like unwanted clutter. Every slam of a door, every shuffle of boots on the stairs, echoed inside me like a verdict already passed. My memories were reduced to inventory, my history cataloged on a stranger's checklist. Clara supervised with a smile of efficiency, pointing, nodding, instructing. Daniel stood in the corner, silent, shrinking smaller with every item hauled away. By the time the last box was loaded, my house had been hollowed into something unrecognizable. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter to steady myself, watching shadows lengthen across the empty walls, wondering how much more silence I could survive. When the truck finally rumbled away, the silence it left behind was louder than any engine. I closed the door gently, afraid the empty rooms might echo too sharply if I let it slam. My feet carried me through the house as if I were walking through a museum of absences. The living room walls still bore pale rectangles where my father's paintings had hung for decades. The mantel looked naked, dustless patches betraying what had been there so long it had become part of the wood itself. I reached out and touched one of those lighter spaces, half expecting to feel the brush strokes, but my fingers met only plaster, cool and flat. In the kitchen, the corner where the refrigerator had stood seemed to breathe cold. The tiles were cleaner there, the grout lines sharp, a ghostly outline of where food once waited, where Sunday dinners had begun. I knelt down, pressing my palm against the square of floor, and for a moment I swore I could hear the hum that had kept me company for years. I filled the dented kettle with tap water and set it on the stove. It wheezed and rattled like an old man with a cough. When the steam rose, I poured myself tea into a chipped mug, trying to drink it as if nothing had changed. But the tea tasted metallic, bitter, heavy with the weight of the missing. I carried it into this parlor, sat on the edge of the sofa they hadn't bothered to take, and tried to steady my breath. The knock at the door startled me. Mrs. Linda, my neighbor from across the street, stood with a grocery bag hanging from her arm. She had sharp eyes softened by kindness, the sort that saw more than you wanted to reveal. She glanced past me into the hollowed rooms, her lips tightening without a word. "I thought I heard movers," she said gently. I nodded, forcing a thin smile. They needed things, said it would help them settle into their new place. Linda stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "Keep your receipts, Cassandra. Everyone you've got, take photos. Don't let them say it was theirs to take." Her words pierced deeper than pity. They carried a kind of warning, a reminder that what was gone wasn't only furniture and paintings, but the fragile boundary between generosity and theft. I promised her I would gather everything, though inside I wondered if proof could ever measure the weight of what had just been stolen. I had always been careful, maybe too careful. Years of living alone had taught me that memory was not enough to hold back the world. Long before Daniel and Clara came with their truck, I had kept a folder of receipts, Yellowed slips for appliances, certificates of authenticity for paintings, even the handwritten bill of sale for my father's marshland canvas. Each document was tucked into a binder in the hall closet. When the refrigerator began to fail 2 winters ago, I had noted the serial number, even registered it with the manufacturer. At Mrs. Linda's suggestion, I had bought a small GPS tracker online and fixed it discreetly inside, hidden behind the bottom drawer. I told myself it was in case of theft, though I never truly believed family would be the ones to test it. I took photos too, quietly, methodically. The blue and white porcelain set laid out on the dining table, the old quilt folded neatly on the bed, the television screen glowing with Sunday news. Each image I had emailed to myself, ensuring the timestamps marked ownership beyond dispute. So when the movers carried my refrigerator away, a signal pinged to my phone within the hour. The device traveled steadily across town, its path drawing a line on the map that ended at the gates of Daniel and Clara's new neighborhood. At nearly the same time, Linda sent me a message. Her doorbell camera had caught every box, every painting, leaving my house. She had already uploaded the footage to a shared drive. By the time the truck reached their new driveway, 2 patrol cars had pulled up, lights flashing in the daylight. Community security arrived with them, called in by Linda's tip. The movers froze mid-step, the refrigerator swaying on its dolly. Clara's confident voice faltered as an officer approached, clipboard in hand, asking for proof of ownership. I didn't need to speak. I opened my email, scrolled to the receipts, the photos, the registration documents. The officer's brow lifted as he compared them to the items listed on the mover's checklist. Daniel's face drained of color. Clara's lips parted as if to argue, but no sound came out. The truck idled, silent except for its rattling engine, while the weight of evidence turned their boldness into stone. Clara moved faster than the police cars ever could. By that same evening, her version of the story had already spread across Facebook groups and whispered threads of neighborhood chats. She painted herself as the beautiful wife, the one simply trying to help her husband's aging sister let go of clutter she no longer needed. My name appeared in her posts, selfish, bitter, ungrateful. To those who didn't know me, the tale was convincing. At first I thought of ignoring it. My instinct had always been silence, to let storms pass without raising my voice. But Linda sat across from me at the kitchen table, her eyes sharp with indignation. If you don't answer once, just once, you let her story stand. So I did, only once. I wrote a short post. No anger, no insults, just a list. Each item marked with dates and receipts. A scanned copy of my father's painting purchase. Time-stamped photos of the porcelain dishes. The tracker record that showed the refrigerator's journey from my house to theirs. Screenshots of Linda's doorbell video. No commentary, only proof. Within hours, the comments began to turn. Neighbors who had known me for decades filled the thread with their own stories. How I'd worked nights at the college library, how Daniel had eaten meals at my table well into adulthood, how I had kept the house in order while he dreamed of something bigger. One wrote, "If Cassandra says it's hers, it's hers. She's never taken a thing from anyone." Clara tried to push back, replying with barbed remarks, but each one only drew sharper rebuttals. By midnight, her words were drowned out by dozens of voices defending me. Daniel never commented. His profile sat silent, his photo unchanged, as if shame itself had muted him. The courtroom wasn't inside the police station that day. It was in the glow of screens, the weight of shared memory, and the quiet authority of truth made visible. Proof did not shout, but it spoke, and people listened. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of leather and dust, the kind of place where words carried weight because they were etched into paper. I sat across the polished oak table from Daniel and Clara, a pen resting loosely in my hand. Daniel's eyes stayed downcast, fixed on the contract in front of him. Clara, arms crossed, shifted in her chair as though the cushions were too stiff for her comfort. I had been given the chance to press charges, to drag the matter into court, but I declined. Punishment wasn't what I wanted. Not really. What I wanted was recognition of what had been taken and the cost it carried. So I asked for restitution, repayment for the damages, coverage for new locks and cameras, and a written acknowledgement that the property was mine. The lawyer cleared his throat, tapping the paper. "If you both sign, this remains a civil settlement. No further action." His tone was matter of fact, but his eyes lingered on Daniel, who finally lifted the pen. His hand trembled as he signed his name. each letter jagged. He slid the document across to Clara, who stared at it with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This is unnecessary," she muttered, but she signed all the same, her name looping like a flourish meant to disguise resentment. I gathered the copies into my folder. My voice was steady, though I felt the tremor in my chest. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," I said quietly, "and it doesn't mean opening my door again as if nothing happened. You'll repay what's owed, but you won't step into my house without invitation. Not anymore." Daniel nodded, a small motion that seemed to cost him everything. Clara exhaled sharply through her nose, but kept silent. Walking out into the Savannah sun, I felt lighter, though not untouched. I hadn't built a wall. I had drawn a line they could see clearly now, etched in ink and bound by consequence. And for the first time, the boundary felt like something I could hold. The house no longer looked like a hollow shell. The walls, once scarred with pale rectangles where memories had hung, now carried fresh coats of paint. I chose a soft cream, something warm that caught the morning light. A second-hand refrigerator hummed steadily in the kitchen corner, not as grand as the one that had been taken, but sturdy enough to hold what I needed. On the mantel, one painting had returned to me, restored by a local craftsman after I found it in a pawn shop on the edge of town. The colors were brighter than I remembered, the marshland glowing as though dusk had just fallen. When I touched the frame, I felt the pulse of continuity, a reminder that not everything could be erased. Daniel came one afternoon, sleeves rolled up, carrying a bucket of paint. He didn't say much, just asked which wall I wanted done first. We worked side by side in silence, his strokes clumsy but earnest. When a line of paint dripped unevenly, he laughed softly, almost ashamed, and I found myself smiling back. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was effort, a small gesture toward mending. The room at the back of the house, once crowded with my sewing machine and stacks of fabric, began to change too. I cleared the shelves, moved in extra chairs, and opened it to the women in the neighborhood. Young mothers brought clothes to mend. Students came to learn stitches, and widows arrived with scraps of fabric and stories to share. The hum of machines and the rhythm of hands filled the air, weaving a kind of fellowship I hadn't known I was missing. The house had been stripped bare once, but now it was filling again, not with possessions, but with purpose. And for the first time in years, I felt the walls breathe with me. Daniel came by one quiet afternoon. No truck, no wife, no list of demands. He stood on the porch with a box in his hands, worn at the corners, as though it had been carried too long. When he opened it, I saw the porcelain teapot set, delicate cream with blue vines curling along the edges. The one our mother used only on Sundays. "I found it in the garage," he said, his voice low. "It should never have left here." His eyes met mine briefly, searching for permission to step inside. I nodded, and he crossed the threshold, setting the box gently on my table. That evening, the house filled with voices again. The neighborhood women gathered in my sewing room, now our shared studio, and I carried the porcelain set into the center of the chatter. Cups clinked softly as I poured steaming tea, the pale china glowing in the light that filtered through the window. The teapot, once a symbol of what was taken, now felt like something returned. Not just an object, but a measure of dignity. As laughter rose around me, I realized my worth had never lived in dishes or paintings or even walls. It was in what I built, what I shared, and what I refused to surrender, even when others tried to strip me bare. I watched the women sip, their hands wrapped around the delicate handles, their smiles widening as stories flowed. The sunlight fell across the table, scattering warmth over porcelain, fabric, and faces. For the first time in years, my house felt not only whole, but alive. The teapot poured, the voices rose, and the rooms filled with something no one could take from me again.